Tichawangana.
Thank you. Thank you. My wife and I arrived in the US last summer, and I remember talking to a man we met in Cape Cod. And he asked me, "Where are you from?" And I said to him, "I'm from Zimbabwe." And his face is totally blank. And so he says, "Where?" I said, "Zimbabwe." No expression on his face. So I say it slowly, Zimbabwe. Nothing. So this morning, as my wife and I were coming here, I thought, maybe to start off, I should ask them to show by raising their hands how many of them knows of Zimbabwe. And I thought, okay, no, I won't do that, so you're safe. One of the things I like to do now is you go into Starbucks and place your order, and they ask for your name, and I tell them Fungai, and they'll look at you, expecting to spell it out for them. By deliberate, don't spell it, wanting to see how it works out. Usually has some pretty interesting results. Someone actually asked me the one time, Fungai, as in plural of fungus? In 2008, Zimbabwe was going through a crazy political and economic crisis. Inflation stood at 79.6 billion%. Actually, it was so crazy that they didn't know how to measure it. And there were all sorts of different figures put out, but the one that's up now and a lot of people commonly quote is 79.6 billion. Food ran out in the grocery stores. Gas ran out at the gas stations. And the headlines like this, Zimbabwe runs out of bread. The currency was doing crazy things. So imagine going to the store to buy bread, and you're told the loaf of bread costs, I don't know, $200 billion. And you come back in the afternoon and it's now $400 billion. So you constantly didn't have enough money. I'll take a little commercial break. That's okay. Just to tell you that Zimbabwe is a really beautiful country. And if you're planning a holiday and you're wondering where to go, you need to visit Zimbabwe. Beautiful sites. Victoria Falls, one of the 7 wonders of the world. If you want to see an ancient city that stood for over 1,000 years, trying to do bungee jumping, whitewater rafting, the place to be. But we go back to that time, 2008, where you had things like this, as Zimbabweans making fun of themselves, saying starving billionaire. It's a really shaky political and economic time. And many people say, the economy is going to collapse. Some say it has already collapsed. Zimbabweans ran away in their thousands. Young Zimbabweans thinking, I'm not gonna wait for this. I'm young, I need to get a job that will pay me, I need to start my career. So they left and went anywhere where they felt they could make a better living. South Africa, Botswana, Australia, the UK, here in the US. And political news became the staple, both in Zimbabwe and international headlines, which all spoke about how crazy the situation in Zimbabwe was and how things were falling apart. But even as we paced up and down the aisles of empty grocery stores, even as the currency fell apart, even as thousands upon thousands of young Zimbabweans left the country, Zimbabweans were still making music. Zimbabweans were still writing books, still designing clothes. And I decided that I wanted to tell that side of the story. So picked up my camera, started a website, and went out and found young Zimbabweans who were doing amazing things. And I will share with you today the stories of 7 of these young Zimbabweans and the initiatives that they started. The thing about these young people I've picked today is that they not only decided that they were not going to leave, they not only decided to stick with what their passion was, they made it work, and they thrived in an environment where everything pointed to the fact that they would not succeed. First guy, plot. And the lesson I learned from him is use what you have. So Plot had an idea. He was passionate about dance. And he felt that dance could be used as a way to get young people to stay off the streets, to stay away from drugs, and to bring them together to talk to them about things like sexually transmitted infections, HIV, staying in school, etc. And he tried a number of things. He started a festival that didn't work out too well initially. He tried to get funding so that he could have these concerts in big venues that wasn't too successful. And one of the biggest things that he did was just took it to the street. He said, why don't we just have people go out in the street and start dancing? In between the different performances, where someone would come and talk about a particular issue. And that's what he did. Today, he has a dance foundation. They have a building. They managed to get funding. And they go into schools and talk to young people. And they're doing a lot of really amazing work. In 2010, this young lady, Priscilla, she decided that she was going to set up Zimbabwe's first ever fashion week. And she got some volunteers, got some young people together, models, and it was a total disaster. I remember the very first day of the fashion week, they had to change the venue a few hours before the thing started. Now you can imagine with a fashion event, you got lights, you got the stands for the cameras. It was a total mess up. By the time it finished, by the end of the week, all the models who had worked for us said, we're never going to work with you again. The designers who had signed up said, we're never going to work with you again. The volunteers said, we're never going to work with you again. And Priscilla, speaking of that time, says it was the most traumatic time of her life. But she came back and held again the following year, and it got better and better. And today's Zimbabwe Fashion Week is the biggest fashion platform in the country. And through her, young Zimbabwean designers and models have managed to get work outside the country, have managed to showcase their work at other fashion weeks in other countries. Sam and Fungai. So these young men are passionate about hip hop and spoken word. And so they started a monthly hip hop gig, which they called Mashoko. And Mashoko is Shona, which is one of the vernacular languages in Zimbabwe, for words. So they get young people together once a month on a Saturday afternoon to stand and rap, drop some lyrics. And it seemed really chaotic. If you went there, you thought, hey, this young people just doing their thing. But one of my friends visited them at their apartment. They were sharing an apartment at the time. And he said to me, Sam and Fungai have this big whiteboard in their apartment, and they've got this plan mapped out. So this is not random what they're doing, they have a vision. And sure enough, that event became an organization, then became a festival. They now run one of the biggest music festivals in the country, which focuses on music for young people and spoken word. And just last year, they opened this place, a co-working space for creatives, Zimbabwe's first creative hub. Fungai. So my name is, it's a unisex name. It applies to both men and women in Zimbabwe. And she realized that even though there were many groups that were pushing women's issues, none of them recognized the fact that middle-class, affluent women also were facing issues of discrimination, domestic violence, and had things that they wanted to talk about. So she set up a platform called Her Zimbabwe. And the idea was, let's give these women some space where they can articulate their issues. And it took off in a really big way. Now she employs, the organization employs people, holds training events, runs a number of different workshops and conferences. Then there's Mobizita. So this is one of the other things I was thinking this morning. I was coming, okay, maybe I should ask them to say his name. Well, basically, he decided that he would teach himself animation. And he got so good at it that he started getting work from international companies like Pixelco. And he realized very quickly that animation is a team sport, so he started teaching others. And today he runs a production company where he employs people and they do music videos, animation for corporates, and they're working on a project to tell African folk tales using animation. It's one of the characters that he's created. The last young person I'd like to talk to you about, his name is Joe. Now, the great basketballer Michael Jordan, his teammates say this of him, that every time Michael came to the game, he brought his best. It didn't matter if it was a training session, it was a real game, he always brought his A game. And Joe reminds me of that. He's been an entrepreneur for about 20 years. He's started things that have failed because of the environment, because of how difficult it was to run a business. And in an environment where many businesses were shutting down all the time, he persisted. Sometime last year, he turned his house into a tech hub and a co-working space, much like this space, but at a smaller scale. And he gives space to young startups to pay a very minimal rental, and in the same space share ideas, share space, and just encourage each other. So I've shared with you these stories of young Zimbabweans who inspire me, whose work reminds me that there are other things that are more important than worrying about how many Instagram followers I have. And push me to do more with whatever little resources I have. But I'd like to share something else with you. It's very fun that we can celebrate victories like this in an environment where so many have failed and say, wow, look at these guys, they succeeded when everyone else did not. But I think any system that does not give a fair shot to everyone to succeed needs our constant attention and interrogation. When Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980, we did a lot of things right. We built schools. Right now we have the highest level of literacy in Africa, 91%. We built hospitals and clinics. We were producing so much food that we could feed everyone and export some. So how did we get to that situation in 2008 where our inflation stood at 79.6 billion%? Many people in explaining this point to a failure in leadership. But I'd like to extend that notion a little bit and say that a failure of leadership often points to a failure of the people to hold their leaders accountable. I think we were so thrilled that we had won our independence that we forgot that we needed to hold our leaders accountable. And so we ended up with the situation in 2008. And I say, and I put it to you, that as young people, with any sort of voice, with any sort of power, our responsibility is to constantly hold each other accountable and hold our leaders accountable. Because freedom is meaningless if we don't use it. And we lose whatever power we have when we don't put it into action. Thank you.
Q&A, so if you have a question, just raise your hand, Fungai will call on you, and then I'll wrap it up when we're out of time.
Yes.
Did any of the people you spoke about, and by the way, thank you, it was a great presentation. Did any of the people you spoke about accessing government funding? Was there anything in place for them to reach out to, or did they find, was it crowdfunding? How did they get the money?
So no government funding for creative endeavors, actually for a lot of different things. It's very difficult to, because the government is so cash strapped and trying to deal with things like health and education. Most of these young people did, they started with their own resources, and then later on got funding from other agencies, different creative or agencies that fund creative initiatives, startups, and different youth projects.
Did corporate entities approach them at all?
Hardly. I mean, they did get sponsorship for events, so much like this event where corporate into a newspaper might say, we'll give you free advertising. A beverages firm might say, we'll donate the drinks, that sort of thing. Yes?
Is there a place that you're curating all these stories so they can be sort of seen, and or did you say that and I'm just not caffeinated?
Yeah, so we've got a website called Zimbo Jam.
Okay.
ZIMBOJAM. So Zimbo is colloquial for Zimbabwean. And so the whole idea of that website was we'd tell these other stories and show that besides all the chaos that was happening, there were other things, other encouraging stories that were taking place.
And sort of a follow-up, what's the next iteration of this? Are you doing more with it? Or are you telling more stories? What's sort of the future of the work?
Yeah, we're really pushing the platform and trying to show these stories to other young Zimbabweans. Because one of the things that has happened when you have a system where everyone is trying to run away, young people don't have any heroes to look up to. So they're thinking, as soon as I finish my school, I'm leaving this place. But if we can show them stories like this, that you know what, there are other young people who are doing amazing things, and it is possible. And if enough of us are doing things, we can do our own little bit to make the situation better. Yes, then after that you can.
Do you find that there is more pressure being put on Mugabe to kind of listen to the voices of people within the country? Has some of that responsibility been picked up by the young folks in Zimbabwe in a way that's been kind of meaningful and helped?
Yeah, there is. The young two young people I spoke about, Fungai and Sam, who started the Creative Hub. They use a lot of comedy and satire to talk about issues that are happening in the country, because it's very difficult to attack those issues directly. So they run a monthly comedy show. They've got a TV show now, which is called Zambezi News, which is satirical, and they're talking about really serious issues, but in a way that's lighthearted and that passes as not a direct threat to the powers that be. Just then, you had a question.
Do you feel more hopeful in 2016 than you did in 2008, or less hopeful, or how are you feeling these days?
Well, one of the reasons I've stayed in Zimbabwe is because I believe that I could make a difference. That my presence there was important, and if as many of us young people stayed, we could make a difference. But to say I feel more hopeful, I would need one of these tags and I feel that out as the last lie that I have told. Yeah. Yes.
If you could give one piece of advice to this American culture and know that they would all definitely take it, what would it be?
I think, one of the things that I admire about this place is how easy and how possible it is to speak your mind without fearing for your life, without being afraid that something will happen to you. And at the same time, I think when we have a lot of something, sometimes we don't appreciate it. When we have a lot of power, sometimes we don't realize just how much power we have. And what I would encourage young people anyway, everywhere, that use it. Because I said you lose it. I mean, like when our parents decided that, hey, you know what, we need to speak up, they had lost their power, and a lot of people in the political leadership could get away with things that at the beginning they would not have been able to get away with. So I'd say use that power, speak up, create platforms where different viewpoints can be expressed. That would be my my one thing to say.
Do you think that with the rise of social media, that helped spread the word, get funding, help, amplify all the work that was being done, and also because so many of the people that you showcase started with little resources. We do have more resources here, and sometimes we're not as creative or resourceful, even in using that social media. And were there instances where you saw some really innovative usage or initiatives that really amplified and eliminated, messaging in terms of communications? Whether it was either amplifying those initiatives or even showing, a corruption or
Definitely, I mean, all the young people I spoke about use social media in a very big way. Use their websites as well to tell their story. And what that does is when they apply for funding and the funders look them up, they see that, oh, okay, these guys are actually doing something, and it helps them to get to get that support from funders. And so definitely there has been a really big use of the internet in spreading, sharing the work that they're doing, and getting attention from different stakeholders. Yes.
I think my question was, I know there are different opinions on whether international assistance is a curse or a help. From your vantage point, which one do you think it is with regards to creating projects like the ones you're outlining?
I think definitely there is some benefit, but you have a problem. I'll give you an example. I visited this really big slum in Kenya, Kibera, and someone was taking me around, told me that there are millions of dollars that have been poured into projects over I don't know how many decades to making this place better, whether it was education, living conditions, whatever it was. But walking around, you can't tell that this has happened. So if you're someone who's pumping money into a project like that, you should stop and say, okay, what are we doing wrong? What is not working out? And I think a lot of times there is a tendency to just throw money at a problem, but asking, what else? What is the real issue here? As what's his name? The young person said that when you go to these places, people are not waiting for help. Right? They're not sitting there waiting for help. Canaan, yes, Canaan. They're not sitting there waiting for help. They're out making a living, doing things. And so I think the big idea, if you want to help, is to go and see, okay, what are people doing, and how can we, hear from them how they want to be helped. What is the best way to make the situation better? So I think it is beneficial, but a lot of times a dependency is created where money keeps pouring in and you're not seeing the results, but a lot of money keeps coming in. There's actually a book by a Zambian economist called Dambisa Moyo, and it's called Dead Aid, and he talks about how all this aid that's pouring into different countries is actually doing more harm than good. Yes.
Kind of doubling down on the previous two questions, are there some examples that you could cite of these are great stories of community growth and personal growth? Have you seen a lot of change come from these organizations that's rippled upward into, say, political organizations or sort of larger scope change in Zimbabwe?
I think one of the things that has happened there's another initiative that I didn't speak about, where previously it was very difficult to find a space to talk to Zimbabwean politicians. You just, where do you see them, where do you meet them? But what one of the initiatives did was it started off as a Twitter initiative where he would tell people on Tuesday at this time we're going to be discussing education, or we're going to be discussing health, and it grew so huge. And then they decided that they would have an actual live event while this discussion was happening. And at a number of those events, they managed to get top politicians to come and talk to young people, which was a real breakthrough. So I think there has been a really big impact with a number of these. And with some of them, even getting the politicians to come and attend the events and watch and listen.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to end there. One more big round of applause, please. All right, it is about that time. Before you get out of here, last few things. Please follow our main man here on Instagram, Twitter. If you have not been to Zimbo Jam yet, please go. It's amazing. He undersold it. It's the leading arts and culture website in Zimbabwe. It's won multiple national awards, so please, there's some amazing stuff there.